Hi everybody, it's Peter Schiff. This is Tuesday, May 4th, 2010. And given all the volatility we've seen today in the market, new concerns that the bailout package for Greece will not work, that maybe the problems will spread. Today there was a lot of talk about problems in Spain. The Dow dropped over 200 points. Commodities were broadly lower. The dollar made a new high for the year against the euro. The dollar index made a new high just over 83. Although this morning, gold also made a new high for the year before dropping about 10 bucks by the close. So again, this is not really dollar strength. It is euro weakness. After all, the dollar is rising against other fiat currencies, but falling against real money, gold. But I wanted to talk again about the similarities between Greece and the United States and the problem in general regarding a sovereign debt, particularly because I had a TV interview I did last week with the son of John Kenneth Galbraith, who is also an economist. And of course, John Kenneth Galbraith is one of the most famous of the Keynesian economists. He literally wrote the textbooks that a lot of people who are economists today read when they were going to school. He also authored The Affluent Society, which I think made him a household name in this country. He worked with many presidents, including FDR. I think even as late as Clinton, he won awards. I mean, he's highly esteemed. Of course, he's completely wrong on just about everything, and his son is carrying out his tradition of being wrong. And I was also an economics professor, helping to confuse our students, as his father did. But anyway, we had a brief discussion, which also led to other discussions that I happened to notice on the internet, on YouTube, on some of the various blogs. Some of the people pointing out that maybe I don't understand the difference between Greece and the United States. Believe me, I understand all the differences. It's my critics who don't understand the similarities and who also don't understand economics. But let me just go over the situation in Greece and the situation in the United States and what's similar and what's different about the two countries. Greece borrowed a lot of money. The Greece government running large deficits, mainly because Greek politicians wanted to stay in office, and so they promised very lavish benefits in terms of pay packages and pensions to government workers in Greece. They did not want to raise taxes to pay for those benefits, so they borrowed the money. And everything was fine as long as there were willing lenders. They were able to accumulate more and more debt, which of course is always a problem with the credit bubble. We experienced that here in the real estate market. People were able to borrow money until the lenders discovered that they wouldn't get paid back and they didn't want to lend anymore. Well, the same thing is happening in Greece. Now, Greece has a situation that every nation is going to have when it borrows a lot of money, and they can either cut back on government spending, raise taxes, or default, or a combination through restructuring. And of course, Greek politicians, they don't want to cut benefits, and there's rioting in the street. People are protesting the benefit cuts. They don't want to raise taxes substantially because that also is not going to play out well in the polls. They don't want to default, but the problem, as far as some economists see it, is that, well, gee, if they can only print money, if it was only back in the good old days where they had the drachma, they'd have no problems because they could simply print drachma. Well, first of all, if they were still using drachma, they probably couldn't have borrowed so much money. Interest rates wouldn't have stayed that low for so long because creditors would have been worried about them printing drachma. They figured that there was more discipline with respect to the euro. But of course, what they did do, though, is they loaned the Greek government too much money relative to the ability of the Greek citizens to repay their debts. But the fear is now that they might default. And also the fear is if they're bailed out, what kind of message does that send to Greek politicians in the future? Well, if you bail us out now, well, gee, you're going to bail us out in the future, so maybe we're not going to live up to the promises that we make for cuts. Or what message are we sending to Spain or Portugal or Ireland or other countries? Hey, just be irresponsible. You too can promise whatever you want to get elected because Germany is going to bail you out. So there is a problem that the European Union is going through right now. But many people think that America is going to escape this problem. They're not. Yes, I understand that the United States government is borrowing in dollars, and we can create an infinite amount of dollars if that is what we want to do. I also understand that we've borrowed a lot of money, and we're going to have the same problem that Greek has. We borrowed in short-term markets, right? We're not borrowing in 30-year bonds, mainly because the government doesn't want to pay the added cost to borrow for 30 years. And of course, if the government tried to borrow for 30 years, rates would rise very sharply. There are a lot of creditors right now who will loan us money for a year, but they're not going to loan us money for 30 years on these low rates because they know rates aren't going to stay low. Now, this Galbraith Jr. said that, well, you know, it's okay because the Fed sets interest rates, short-term rates. We don't have to worry about rates rising and having a problem making the payments because the Fed can just set them low. Well, it's true the Fed can set rates low. But in order for the federal government to borrow at those low rates that the Fed sets, they have to have a willing lender. And the problem is, at some point in the near future, the lenders will no longer be willing, either because it becomes obvious that we have too much debt and we're going to try to inflate our way out of it. Inflation itself starts to pick up. People start to understand that inflation is 5% or 10% a year, and they don't want to lend at 1%. Whatever happens, the private demand dries up. Then the Federal Reserve is going to be forced to raise interest rates to try to put an end to the inflation and try to entice our creditors into continuing to fund our debts. That's when we have the huge problem, because if interest rates rose substantially, the government really can't afford to make the payments, just like Greeks can't afford it. Now, what people are saying is, well, we don't have to afford it, because it doesn't matter if nobody wants to loan us money, because the Fed will do it. Well, that's a bigger problem. If the Federal Reserve decides to buy all the bonds at those low interest rates, if it doesn't want to raise interest rates to get real buyers, if it wants to keep interest rates artificially low so that the government doesn't have to default like Greece, then the Fed has to buy. But what are the results of that? That debases the dollar even further, creates even more inflation, kills demand even more for dollars, which means the Federal Reserve has to buy even more Treasury debt because now there's even less demand. And of course, all the Treasuries that are already in circulation, the holders around the world want to get rid of them because it's obvious they're going to lose money, which means the Fed has to step up the printing presses even faster, not only to buy the new bonds the government is trying to sell, but all the other bonds that everybody is trying to unload. And we get runaway inflation or hyperinflation. That's it. Now, that's the same thing as default. Now, can you imagine you've got these guys like Galbraith or other people that think that our ace in the hole, that the reason we don't have to worry is because we can create inflation, that our debts aren't a problem? You know, can you imagine if you actually ask Ben Bernanke, you know, are you okay with this? Are you willing to let inflation run out of control? He'd have to say no. He'd have to say, well, if inflation started to pick up, I'm going to have to raise interest rates to fight it. Well, then we're put in exactly the same situation that Greece is in right now. Now, there are other people who might say, well, we don't have to worry about inflation because it's impossible. We can never have inflation with high unemployment. Well, they're completely wrong. In fact, you can have higher inflation with high unemployment than with low unemployment. But the reality is, even if the economy improved, which it's not doing right now, and people started getting jobs, rates would move up. We can't afford to pay it. The amount of money that we've borrowed, were rates to even to go back to 5 or 6%, and the United States government to have to refinance the entire national debt at 5 or 6%. We can't do it, let alone 10% or 15%, which is going to happen. You know, the bottom line is we are in just as much trouble, if not more trouble, than Greece. The only difference is Greece is dealing with its problems now. We're going to deal with our problems tomorrow. In fact, because so many people are worried about Greece, money is temporarily flowing into the dollar, which is enabling us to go deeper into debt and postponing the day of reckoning. But remember, the same people who are saying that we don't have to worry, that it's contained to Greece, these are the same people that thought the subprime problem in the mortgage market was contained to subprime, and they're the same people who didn't even think there was a problem before we saw it in subprime. At the time, I was stating it wasn't a matter of a contagion. The entire mortgage market had the disease. It just was showing up in subprime before it showed up in prime. Well, the United States suffers from the same disease that Greece suffers from. It's just that the symptoms are more evident in Greece now than they are in the United States. But they're coming. We have the same disease, if not a bigger dose. We're going to get just as sick. The fact that we can print money doesn't mean that we're exempt, because it's still default whether you do it honestly or dishonestly through printing money, And unfortunately, the inflationary route is actually the more drastic.